Hey everyone, and welcome to another Kano Reviews. Today we take a look at the Ubisoft-published Dark Messiah of Might and Magic, created by Arcane Studios, who later became famous for titles like Dishonored. Dark Messiah promised to bring the Might and Magic universe to a first-person experience powered by the Source engine, which also powered Half-Life 2. This meant that a great emphasis would rely on physics-based interactions. In fact, that was the big draw and marketing point, in that you could use those physics in fighting off your enemy. Whether it was kicking them down a cliff or ravine, shoving a barrel or other heavy object right in their face, or cutting a rope to unleash a swinging chandelier to smack them in the face. This all sounds very fun and all, but I remember being very unimpressed with the screenshots and visuals that I saw back when it was released. It just looked bland and kind of uninspired, and I thought that the physics-based combat could feel a bit gimmicky, because everything had to be set up by the creators, like picking what surfaces you could cut or not in order for something to happen. But after so many years, I wanted to dive into this game for the first time, especially after revisiting so many titles that use the Source engine. Let's first talk a little bit about the story and setting. I should say that I'm not familiar with any Might and Magic game, so the lore or factions might very well elude me, but I never had a hard time understanding the story. That's unfortunately also because the story is very bare minimum. You are a guy named Sereth who is sent on a quest to retrieve a magic skull. With this skull in the wrong hands, a powerful demonic presence can be summoned. So you are sent to retrieve it, to keep this from happening, and along the way a succubus by the name of Xana travels along you to provide vocal commentary on things and show herself every now and then during a cutscene. You will also come across another woman called Liana, who will join you on the journey as well and can support you by healing you or opening doors, as she is a spellcaster. Both female characters are very shallow, but Xana was a bit less annoying since Liana feels very underwritten. She loses a family member in a battle, then already warms up to you mere moments later, forgetting about the tragedy that just happened. And it also seems that it takes almost nothing to win her heart, as she admits to you that she feels special about you, whereas I was like, woman, I hardly know you. Xana, on the other hand, offers a lot more words of flirting and sexual innuendos, but it actually fits her character since she is trying to convince you to seize the skull for yourself and become a powerful entity with her at your side. Her flirting comes with an agenda, which is why I find her a bit better written, but still quite bare bones. The journey is fully experienced in first person. The cool thing about this game is how you can set up your character quite differently depending on your skills that you level up. You can make your archetypes like a brawler that uses a sword and shield and benefits from extra damage to critical hits, or a magic wielder that can throw lightning and fireballs or set fire traps for the enemy, or a stealth build where you sneak around and hit the enemy with poison daggers or a bow. There aren't enough points in the game to distribute it throughout all of the skill trees, so you're really going to have to create a specific build. I personally went with a melee build with the occasional magical spells and pretty much left stealth alone. And was that the right choice for me? Well, let's see. So the game actually starts out really cool and actually really impressed me, to the point where I thought to myself, wow, why have I never played this game up until now? The opening sequence is very cool and spectacular, with a city coming under siege of enemy soldiers and a giant cyclops. It feels like the opening of Skyrim, only this was done many years before that. There are many friendly NPC soldiers screaming, running and fighting, and it all feels very cool and epic. You can also take down the ogre in a spectacular fashion and then get to explore the city a bit. And this is not a giant city like in open world games, but a smaller hub where you can walk around a bit to find some stuff, but you will never get lost. It actually made me think how there should be more linear medieval games out there, because so often medieval setting games go for an open world type of game rather than a linear one. And then the act after that actually has you chase an enemy across rooftops, and it still really captivated me, as each chapter offered something different and the tempo was high. It's also here where you come to face against your first human enemies, and it's not often that a game meets my expectations exactly to a T. Now don't get me wrong, I was blown away by the first half hour. The intro sequence was really cool and not at all what I expected. But the combat and encounters with regular enemies was exactly what I expected. So you face off against various guards and knights in these areas, where you can clearly see that the creators have set up things that you can use to your advantage. You can, for example, kick the enemies into the fire to light them up so they die faster, or kick them into a small wall of spikes so it insta-kills them. The weird thing about it is that the power of the kick is context sensitive. This means that if you kick an enemy at random, they will only just stagger, and all you will be doing is waste your stamina. But if you are in the range of a ledge or something like fire or spikes, the body will suddenly ragdoll with the strongest flail like it's made out of jelly. This can honestly be a bit frustrating if you are trying to kick an enemy off a ledge, but the game decides that you are just a mere inch too far from the ledge to where it will not ragdoll the enemy. Again, it feels like the game is deciding on the rules to which you can fight your battles, instead of you trying things out for your own. There are also planks on poles that you can break so that things on top like barrels or boxes will fall or roll down, crushing enemies in the process. This is all fun and all in the beginning, but quickly can become old after you've done that for the 5th or 6th time. Same with the fire. It was really cool to just kick them into the fire, but after you set fire to a dozen enemies already, it just becomes repetitive to do another battle where you can just, keep kicking the enemy. But what about actual combat with melee weapons? Well, unfortunately, that is also not really good. It's incredibly basic and feels much like Oblivion's melee system, which is also not that great. If you haven't put a lot of points into melee stats, you will also feel like you are very underpowered. You have to hit enemies so many times without them flinching all that much, and it feels like you are hitting them with a broccoli or something instead of an actual sword. They, on the other hand, actually do a lot of damage, and it's suicide in the first half of the game to really go melee only. Which again is why the creators have set all these things you can use like fire and spikes, but it just feels so confined in these few things you can use. It's just the same principle that Bulletstorm also has, where there are these things you can use to kill your enemies, but you see the same things over and over and over again. Later on in Dark Messiah, you can also hack away at statues to let them fall down, or destroy barricades to have giant coffins fall down on enemies, etc. Probably the most famous part is the ascension of the cliffs, where you are fighting against orcs, and you can kick them down the high cliffs and hear them scream as they fall down. It's very fun indeed, but also gets old after a while. If you go for a magic build, you will have a bit of a better time in my opinion, since the spells are a lot stronger and you have a variety of spells at your disposal, including the destructive kind, but also the ones where you can have one of the enemies help you for a short amount of time. The AI does a very poor job though of attacking their fellow mates, and more than anything it's just an attack to keep one of the enemies off your back. You will also face off against spiders, and I will give the game this, and that is that these spiders are probably the scariest spiders I have seen in any game yet. I absolutely hate spiders, but CG spiders often don't scare me since their movements aren't all that convincing. I should also say that tarantulas don't scare me since they are so big and furry that they almost resemble a mammal. It's the huntsman spiders that scare me, and this game goes full on for that huntsman look, and they are just incredibly gross looking in this game to the point where I always fought them with fire magic from afar. So well done on the creepy spider creation. But let's now talk about my biggest problem with the game, and again, I already had some problems including the forgettable story and characters and the combat, which should be the big appeal, and it's a bit underwhelming. But my biggest problem are the really boring environments. When the game starts, you are outside and enter this beautiful looking city, and that is when the game works. The game is capable of creating some really nice sections and environments from time to time, and these are mostly outside. Another great section is the harbor, where you try to sneak onto a boat to leave the city, or an area outside where you are hunted by this giant worm-like creature. But only a very small amount of the game is played outside, or in interesting locations, and all the rest is in these same dark dungeon, temple, or cave type of locations. You go through one narrow and dark hallway after the next, facing against the same type of enemies, and it honestly made it incredibly boring and repetitive. It's like playing Oblivion, but only the caves and dungeons. I thought the caves and dungeons in Oblivion all looked very similar and boring, but it worked in that game since there was an entire world to discover outside of that. But here, you are forced to spend hours on end in these dark, similar looking environments, and it sucked out all the energy for me of playing this game. The game isn't all that long, it's maybe 7 to 8 hours, but it took me almost 2 weeks to complete since I just got bored with the game so fast every time I played it. If it's not a temple or cave, it's a spider's den or a sewer you are going through. Honestly, none of these environments scream impressive, and it's things we have seen many times before and also done better. Having good levels or variety in them is important because it makes you excited and anticipating what is around the next corner. But I never had that here, and I was also never surprised. It's just all so forgettable, which is such a shame because I do think there's potential here. The characters are forgettable, the environments are forgettable, the story is forgettable, the gameplay can be fun, but can also become really repetitive. Good things are the awesome intro, and I wish more of the game was on that epic scale. Others are the few sections that are outside and create some variety, like the docks or the chase sequence with the snake monster. And also some optional quests like saving a character or not, and actually having an impact later on is also cool. There are multiple endings, but they are not that impressive. The endings themselves also feel really lackluster, and it really feels like a low-budget game. Dark Messiah was a game that when I was done with it, I thought, why did I actually just play? I don't think I will ever play this game again, and can honestly not really recommend it. Maybe to those who like dungeon crawlers or first-person melee games, but honestly, the system is not that different from Oblivion, and that game offers so much more than just that. In the end, Dark Messiah gets a 6.2. There's some fun to be had in the first intro of the game, but it quickly became a chore afterwards to complete. It's such a shame too, because you can see the desire in the creators' ideas to make something really unique, but they either did not have the budget or technical capabilities to pull something like that off in that time. Luckily with Dishonored, they remedied that a lot.